Is there a CIA influence behind the Charlie Hebdo attack?
I'm not sure there's that relationship with the Hebdo attack, but we do know a couple of things. That a month before the Hebdo attack, the Charlie Hebdo attack, a company linked to the Rothschild family purchased. We also know that the chief French, one of the chief investigators of the attack, was said to have committed suicide. But now it's come out that he had an argument with the French Interior Minister, Mr. Kazanov, and that's starting to look like this investigator was murdered. I think those who had the most to gain from that attack are the neoconservatives. Certainly the way Mr. Netanyahu barged in Paris for the memorial service would indicate that the Israelis had more than a passing interest in the attack on Charlie Hebdo.
Why one of the biggest capitalist family in the history, Rothschilds, purchased a comic magazine like Charlie Hebdo? What do you think about it?
Well, it's the same reason George Soros finances both sides of many political issues. We find Soros involved in supporting right-wing and left-wing groups. It's so that these oligarchs can control the message. So that you'll find Soros supporting the Green Party, yet Soros money in Ukraine supporting neo-Nazis. They can frame the entire argument for any issue. So we do know that Charlie Hebdo had become such a anti-Muslim and anti-Christian periodical with its cartoons showing the Prophet Muhammad and Jesus in terrible situations. But the criticism of Jews was Moses and other Jewish figures was very muted. As a matter of fact, Charlie Hebdo fired a cartoonist who made fun of Sarkozy's son marrying a wealthy Jewish woman just to advance his career. He was fired for a cartoon about that because he was accused of anti-Semitism. And of course, we heard nothing about the anti-Islam and anti-Christian cartoons put out by this magazine. So that is all to inflame tensions in Europe between various religious groups, and it's successful. these street protests that began almost overnight, where there's brand new signs made, just freshly printed, brand new flags manufactured, and the protest groups have seemingly unlimited sources of money, is right out of this CIA playbook of what's known as the themed revolution or the color revolution. And we saw it play out in Ukraine twice with Orange Revolution and Maidan Square. The protests obviously in Turkey were well financed, as they were in Georgia and in Egypt and in Tunisia and in Syria. This is all part of this new manufactured opposition, manufactured protest movement. And it's all out of a playbook that was authored by Gene Sharp of the University of Massachusetts. And it's classic CIA destabilization operations. CNN is a part of the U.S. intelligence psychological warfare campaign. I reported in 1999 that the CIA and the U.S. Army psychological warfare branch actually employed interns at CNN's headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. They were working on news stories about Bosnia and Kosovo at the time, and CNN first denied it and then admitted that they were doing it. This is part of this close connection now between the U.S. news media and the Pentagon and CIA to not report news but propaganda. And unfortunately, we've now seen Al Jazeera become part of this, and they're largely pushing British MI6 lines, but nevertheless, Al Jazeera is no longer really in the news business, but also covers all these demonstrations, as we saw, for example, with the Arab Spring. Yeah, the CNN, especially after Ted Turner lost control of the network, has become a willing accomplice of the CIA. I personally can attest to the fact that CNN tried to get my sources on the 2002 coup in Venezuela against Hugo Chavez, and that was a CIA coup, and CNN was very much involved in the propaganda during that coup against that government. Well, I don't know how many of the CNN reporters know what they're actually doing in support of the CIA. I think many of them just are looking for a paycheck and are happy to have a job, because it's not a certain thing to have a job very long in the media today. But certainly the word may have gone out to the protesters that CNN was there to give them very good coverage, and that would explain the welcome that the CNN reporters received.
American and British mainstream media are criticizing and attacking Turkish government very harshly. So what do you think, what is the reason for that?
Well, I think it largely began when Turkey developed its independent foreign policy, especially in relation to Gaza and the Palestinians. But I think now the media in Britain and the U.S. is looking at reports that Turkey is becoming less than a democracy and more of a rule by President Erdogan. But of course, they fail to recognize the fact that Erdogan won re-election quite handily, and won the election for president quite handily. So, of course, that doesn't mean that this criticism is going to stop. But it's largely because of Turkey's independent foreign policy and decision not to try to get into the European Union anytime soon.
Are there reporters in Turkey who are employed by CIA?
Well, I think we can again go back to the WikiLeaks documents, and we see a number of cases where journalists in various countries visited the U.S. Embassy and had conversations with the known CIA officers at the U.S. Embassy. So, yes, of course, the CIA uses journalists, much like they use religious figures and businessmen around the world. They've done it for a number of years. As to whether somebody's getting a paycheck from the CIA or they're merely maybe being tipped off by the CIA on news stories, I think are two different things. One would be an actual agent if they took money, but if they received information in return for information, that's considered a news source. So I don't consider that to be espionage. But certainly if somebody were receiving money, and there are journalists who do receive money from the CIA and other intelligence agencies, and that certainly would put them in the role of being intelligence assets. And I don't think Turkey is any exception to any other country when it comes to that type of thing.